they face paying twice, as they remain liable for their share of the costs when the council eventually gets round to doing the work. So you'd think from this state of affairs that the bottom is in fact falling out of the council's housing revenue account. The reality is very different. In fact, we're currently sitting on a vast kitty of more than £185 million in HRA reserves. This has arisen because over many years the council has largely funded its capital works out of capital receipts. Touchingly, it refuses to factor in the vast bulk of these capital receipts into its future projections, because it argues that the council's policy on sales could at any moment alter if political control of the council changed. Could it be that the Tories are less confident about their future performance than they make out? I suspect that my comments will be greeted by a mixture of denial and defensiveness by the members opposite. I think that would be a shame, because with the buyout of the housing revenue account, the council has the opportunity to show some real imagination in developing a positive and forward-looking vision for its role as a provider of housing in the borough. What this means is that we need a clear timescale for improving the fabric of our most run-down estates to turn them into places where people truly can aspire to live. It also means a clear strategy to moderate council rents in order to help some of the most hard-pressed residents in our borough. And it means remedying the woeful lack of any meaningful council development programme in the borough to make a start on tackling the chronic shortage of affordable housing that so many of our residents face. I look forward to seeing if the Cabinet Member for Housing can do better next year. In the meantime, I would ask you to join me in voting against this dusty old policy relic.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Tom.
Madam Mayor, always a joy to hear Councillor Thomas in full cry. His current cry is 75% of the capital receipts in excess of spending estimate should be used for social rented housing. I know his heart is in the right place. It's where his head is that I'm concerned about. Because simply, well, you will recall that in previous housing practice, when central government had total control, we in Wandsworth needed to maintain high rents because some 25% of those rents went back to central government to send up north. So the Localism Act is one of the most exciting acts that's come through in terms of housing, because this will allow us to buy out the housing revenue account, and of course we'll need funds to do that, not just by borrowing or indeed using the reserves, but of course using the contribution of our rents. And it should be pointed out that, you know, those rents are not academic. They're used to upgrade our estates, improve services, and regenerate the estates. And I would like to point out to councillors that the new survey, the Link survey, which we do every year, has shown that council tenants and leaseholders are well satisfied, not moved from 65% satisfaction to 75% satisfaction this year. So quite clearly, we're doing something right with our rental strategy. But the word prudent is not a bad one to consider in that. Councillor Thomas thinks it's a crime to have £180 million in reserves. I think building those up is a sign of prudence. And prudence, you may recall, was a word used by Mr. Gordon Brown, the uninvented Gordon Brown. And when, certainly in the first 2 years of the Labour government, he kept to conservative spending plans, and then, of course, profligacy took over. And in George Osborne's words, not fixing the roof when the sun didn't shine. So yes, we'll need to go into the market, and indeed we'll pay off the housing revenue account in due time, and create, if you like, headroom. And it's rather amusing, at our housing committee last week, when the word headroom came up, one of the housing officers pointed out that Councillor Carpenter had managed to spend that 3 times over. But the aim of that is not just headroom, but the aim is also to use affordable rent. It's high time that we had rents that reflected much closer the market rents. And by doing so, one needs to remember not only are we following government policy, but we're also ensuring the only way we're going to get funds from central government is by going for affordable rents. And indeed, already we've successfully achieved that by having some £800,000 coming in from central government to match our 3 million in order to generate some 26 units. So I'd remind Councillor Thomas that rents foregone are rents foregone forever. You get what you pay for. So may I suggest very strongly that we in Wandsworth should carry on and support our current rent policy so that we can continue to ensure the regeneration of Wandsworth housing.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. Councillor Carpenter.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Thomas has outlined the bigger picture on housing policy. I want to look at some of the detail. Now, the leaders announced with much fanfare Wandsworth's Open Council initiative, but nowhere in the 27 key indicators will you find council rents or council service charges, nor will you find them in the longer list of over 90 key indicators. I would suggest that there's a reason for this. Wandsworth had the highest council rents and service charges, not just in London, but in the country. Not number one for service and value, but number 169. So much for the openness and transparency trumpeted by our dear leader. If we look at the detail of council rents, we see that the council's proposed average rent increase of £8.33 a week, or £433 a year, takes the average rent to £121.71 a week, or £6,277 a year. Quite a lot of money for anyone on a modest income. However, the government has set a limit rent of £113.26 a week, close to Wandsworth's current average rent of £112.38 a week. Now, what does this mean? It means that the government will not reimburse Wandsworth for housing benefit paid above the £113.26 a week. Now, according to the Housing Department's figures, 73% of the proposed rent increase will be paid back by Wandsworth in housing benefit. Only 27% will be retained to spend on our housing estate. So out of a total rent increase of £7.4 million, Wandsworth will retain only £2 million. Madam Mayor, I would submit that this is a very inefficient way of raising money. If any of us were donating to a charity and we were told that 73 pence of every pound we donated was going to be spent in administration costs, I suspect that we'll very soon cross that charity off our list. But that is exactly what the financial wizards of Wandsworth are asking us to do. The only people who actually pay the £433 rent increase are the hard-working and aspiring families who are not in receipt of housing benefits. Precisely the people who have been squeezed hardest by the government's austerity measures. People whose votes one would have thought the Tory party aspired to. Indeed, the only time I can recall this Tory council reducing rents was immediately before the 2010 election. And that didn't do them any good because they lost 4 seats. Madam Mayor, what is even more peculiar is that the housing revenue account doesn't even need the £2 million that will be raised by this rent increase. It is in rude good health, with ample reserves of £185 million. These will be bolstered by the new financial settlement with the government to well over £1 billion by the end of the 30-year planning period. I really am at a loss to understand this policy. It seems to me that by pursuing these reckless rent increases, the leader has shot himself not in the foot, but in the balls. Or at least he would have done if he had any. Madam Mayor, we see the same thing when we look at some of the service charges. Charges for communal heating and hot water to some 4,000 of our tenants and leaseholders are to rise by an average of 20%, reflecting the increase in energy prices last year. But this average disguises some individual increases of over 60%, £5 a week or £250 a year. At the Housing OSC, I proposed that increases of over 30% should be phased over 2 years to mitigate the impact on hard-pressed tenants and leaseholders. There aren't many of them, and the Council is unlikely to be out of pocket, as the current fall in energy prices means that its costs are likely to be over-recovered this year. But the hard-faced Tories on the committee said no. Madam Mayor, I would ask the leader to look again at the Council's rent and service charges policies. It is currently proposing to impose rent increases which are not financially justified on those hard-working council tenants who are most affected by the current squeeze on living standards. Why make their life even more difficult? Just for the fun of it?
Councillor Nichols.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Wandsworth Council is in the enviable position of having a fully balanced housing revenue account and financed a 30-year business plan. Wandsworth's prudent approach and active asset management that has also included promoting the right to buy has meant that 100% of our stock meets the decent home standards, meaning our estates are attractive and nice places to live. Our planned maintenance programme has also meant that we've been able to control leaseholder bills for major works. This is in stark contrast to other councils who have built up massive backlogs of repairs, which has led to a number of their leaseholders facing bills of £20,000, £30,000 and even more. Our plans for the HRA subsidy buyout are well advanced, and we are confident that we can reduce the level of borrowing required by the prudent use of HRA balances, being mindful that for each and every year we extend repayment of that debt, we incur interest payments in the region of £5 million a year. If other councils had been more prudent, efficient, effective, we would not find ourselves in the position of bailing them out from their mismanagement and having to contribute some £434 million. Let's review the list of shame of some of those councils in London who failed to deliver decent council housing by 2010, as required by the previous Labour government, and will be receiving settlements that will in effect be paid for in part by Wandsworth council tenants. Hackney Council continues to have 29% non-decent homes. Yeah, and will receive and will receive and will receive a handout from the Secretary of State as of a settlement of £750 million. Newman Council, with 18% non-decent homes, will receive a handout of £544 million. Tower Hamlets, with 52%.
Please allow Councillor Nichols to continue.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Non-decent homes will receive £236 million. Haringey Council, with 20% non-decent homes, will receive a handout of £234. Southwark Council, with 31% non-decent homes, will receive a handout of £199 million. Lambeth Council, with 54% non-decent homes, will receive a handout of £165 million. Now, what do all these councils have in common? Yes, you are correct. They are, as you would expect, Labour councils, Labour controlled. In fact, out of 7 local authorities in London with 0% non-decent homes, 5 are Conservative: Barnet, Croydon, Hillingdon, Wandsworth and Westminster, while only 1 is Labour controlled. There may be a clamour from the opposition for us to borrow more today under the HRA settlement. However, what we cannot do under any circumstances is not to think about tomorrow. This prudent approach has served the council, especially our tenants and leaseholders, well, and we should not put ourselves in the position where our unrivalled financial and asset management track record is tarnished.
Thank you, Councillor Nichols. Councillor Cooper?
There's one part of me that really enjoys this particular debate because we sit in the council chamber and a group of people who normally spend their entire time extolling the virtues of why we've got to have such a low council tax, hard-pressed local taxpayers and so on and so forth, suddenly turn into a group of people who say that it's absolutely essential that we charge people £433 extra a year, £6,271 being the average rent, and so on and so forth, which dwarfs the amount that we charge our local taxpayers by some considerable margin. We've got 185 million in our HRA account, whoopee-dee. Now, there would be more, of course, but the reason there isn't is not because, as Councillor Tom was trying to explain, that we need to keep our rents so high so that we can pay central government to send the money up north. No, the reason we're sending the money up north is because our rents are so high. If our rents were lower, our contribution to the HRA centrally would have been much less over the years. Of course, that might have led to a slightly smaller HRA reserve, but 185 million is, after all, really quite a lot of money, bearing in mind we only now have 17,000 properties. You can do the math as to how much that is per property. Now, it was either Councillor Tom or Councillor Nichols who was talking about you get what you pay for. Well, I don't think that's true for our council tenants. They pay an awful amount of money. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, HQN stands for the Housing Quality Network. Not only does Wandsworth go off into the corner of all of their graphs as having the highest rents by absolutely miles in the country, we also share the rather bizarre distinction of spending the least on our properties. So contrary to everything that Councillor Nichols was just saying about our fantastic prudence and investment in our properties, it simply ain't true. That's the other reason why there's 185 million in the HRA reserve, because we charge very high rents and we don't spend very much of them on repairing and doing up our properties. Moving to the idea that our rents need to reflect market rents, so-called affordable rents, well, of course, we're actually in the position where we're already, having to say that we won't put our rents up by 80% because they would be breaching the limit rents. And so we've agreed, you have even agreed from your side, that we'll actually put them up by less than that. And Councillor Carpenter's points about why on earth would we want to put our rents up even more, and there are councils across the country of all political parties who are going to be bailed out as they buy out of the HRA. Very selective little list there from Councillor Nichols. That list could go in the direction. It's nothing to do with political control where you find yourself on the buyout. But it is ridiculous that we are talking about putting up our rents this year at all. We should be trying to negotiate a very small increase, if any increase at all. Our rents are the highest in the country. We should not be proud of that. We should see that as a matter of considerable shame that we are overcharging people hugely and then not even keeping their properties in proper repair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is not actually the sort of the old debate that Councillor Thomas said that it was going to be, because this is actually quite an unusual debate to be having, because for the last 32 years this council has been very fastidious about paying off the debts that it inherited from the previous Labour administration. Councillor Belton obviously will remember it, as maybe nobody else here would remember those days, and have taken great pride in the fact that we've for many years been a debt-free authority. And here this evening we're talking about
taking... Point of order, Madam Mayor. Can I have it explained to me what I'm accused of saying?
You're accused of remembering, Councillor Belton. Yes, so this evening we're actually talking about taking on a debt of £436 million. So this is slightly new and perhaps rather scary territory for this council. Very little actually has been said about that, oddly enough. There's been a lot of talk about all the money in our reserves and what we can spend it on and so on. But of course we do have this debt of £436 million, and it will have to be paid back. And so, as can be seen from the report, the very clear advice of our finance people is that we do need this money in reserves, not only to pay for the repairs and maintenance of our properties, no matter how appalling it may be in some people's opinions. We do require the money to pay for that, and of course we do require the money to pay back our debts. Now, an example of sort of Labour-nomics that we get to hear was at the last Housing Committee, and we heard at the beginning of the meeting a very interesting and eloquent plea for more spending on particular estates, and within 30 minutes we then had an equally interesting and evocative plea for reductions in revenue. Now, the problem is that the housing revenue account, as I think all members are aware, is self-balancing, and so if the less money we get into the account, the less money we can actually spend. As Councillor Nichols pointed out, we do have 100% decent homes here. We were one of the first countries in the Council, as Councillor Thomas very kindly reminded us, to achieve that 3 years, I think it was, ahead of the estimated time that the then Labour government brought in. And again, as Councillor Nichols has said, there are a number of, I believe, Labour-controlled authorities in London who care so much for their tenants that they don't actually have their estates to the decent home standards that we do. So the shocking conditions that Labour councillors opposite have been telling us about our own properties, we can only imagine what they must be like in these Labour boroughs, and our sympathy goes out to the residents of those particular estates. And another thing that's not actually been mentioned really by anybody this evening, rather oddly enough, is that one of the proposals that we're looking at tonight is to spend some £30 million on improvements to our estates. Obviously, one of the problems if we defeat this particular motion this evening is presumably that money will not be spent. I would advocate really that this expenditure is needed, and we do need to maintain the rents policy that we have in order to keep our properties in very good order to the satisfaction of our tenants. I think somebody mentioned a figure of 75% satisfaction this evening. I think that's actually quite good. The Labour councillors presumably speak to the 25% who are dissatisfied, and obviously we will do our best to please everybody if we can. So in conclusion, Madam Mayor, I do think that this is a very prudent and a very sensible option that we have this evening, and I do commend it, and I hope that the Council will support this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. The motion now before the Council is the adoption of the recommendation in paragraph 8 of the Executive Report in relation to the Housing Revenue Account. Please indicate by a show of hands those for the motion. Thirty-three for the motion. Those against the motion? Twelve against the motion. Any abstentions? The result of the voting is 33 for, against 12. The motion is carried.